Hi, everyone. We are just about to close out the day. We're going to start this last session with a brief video, and then we will ask Elder Capreol to finish our day with a prayer. But let me introduce the video. First of all, last night I was very pleased to sit down virtually for a chat with Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson. We had a chance to discuss the dual challenges that we face globally, climate change and the rapid loss of species. And I asked him about his dual responsibilities, the Minister of Climate Change, and he's also got nature in his portfolio. And how does he see that as a path to building a nature positive and carbon neutral world? I started with that question because there was a recent global report from IPBES that warns that humanity actually needs to solve both the nature equation and the climate crises together or risk solving neither one of those. And I think if you go back and listen to some of the speakers from today, you will actually have seen that represented in many of the lived experiences of Indigenous people. Next, I asked him a question about the minister's own life. It's a rare glimpse into that life because as a young man growing up in the Boreal and his connection to that forest, he visits it every year still. And I wanted to get a little bit of an understanding of where he comes from in terms of his heart. And recognizing that we have presenters at the People's Summit from Windsor to the waters of Hudson Bay, I asked him for his final thoughts and what he would recommend for the group, and you'll get to hear a little bit about that. But let's go now to the video and actually hear the conversation that I had with Minister Wilkinson. So let me just start by saying a big thank you to Canada's Minister on Environment and Climate Change for joining us today at the People's Summit, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. Minister, welcome to the People's Summit, where we are going to showcase 50 speakers talking about the special places they would like to see protected. Actually, we're just trying to make your job easier, quite frankly, Minister. That's what we're doing.
Well, that's a good thing.
I think so too. So on the heels of the new IPBES report, it's a global special report that warns humanity needs to solve the nature and climate crises together or risk solving neither. And the fact that you are the minister who has the responsibility not just for getting to carbon neutrality, but also protecting 25% of our lands and waters by 2025 and 30% by 2030. Could you speak to how the government of Canada is sort of seeing these two twin crises and how they will respond from a policy perspective, and where you may see opportunity and synergy with those two?
Yeah, I'm glad that you framed it like that. I think often people talk a lot about climate change, and of course, climate change is an extremely important topic. But as you noted in your question, there are two great crises that are facing humanity. One is climate change, but the other is the nature crisis, the incredible loss in biodiversity that has been happening around the world over the past number of decades, both of which threaten the future of humanity. And both of which are tightly interrelated. They are obviously slightly different, but there are definitely elements of these crises that relate to each other very strongly. Before I was in this job, I was the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. We have a great crisis with Pacific salmon. And one of the fundamental reasons why salmon are in decline is climate change. So I think it's really important that we actually understand that we have to move forward in a manner that is actually going to address the climate issue on the way to being carbon neutral. But we also have to address the nature crisis on the way to being nature positive. And so we have targets for both, of course, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions on the way to net zero by 2050. We have targets of 25 by 25 and 30 by 30 in terms of protected spaces, which relate to stemming the decline in biodiversity and addressing species at risk. But I think we often don't talk about how some of the prescriptions actually are the same. So in the context of protected spaces, of course, they're important for biodiversity, but they also are important in terms of protecting intact carbon stocks that we simply do not want to disturb, or we will make the problem worse. In the context of nature-based solutions like planting trees and wetlands and grasslands, they are really important from a carbon sequestration perspective, but they're also critically important for restoring boreal caribou and a range of other species. So I think we need to be thinking about these things together, and working to ensure that we are creating what some folks, including Harvey Locke, talk about as a carbon neutral and a nature positive future.
Thank you. And then maybe you could speak on a more personal level. I guess one of the things I'm always fascinated with is that you spent a fair amount of time in the boreal. You've paddled the waters, you know that landscape, and I always find it interesting in our conversations anyway, just to hear you talk about that as a special place in your heart.
Yeah, I had the great fortune to grow up in northern Saskatchewan. Well, I grew up in Saskatoon, but my father had a canoeing outfitting business in the north. So I spent from the time I was probably 12 years old through until running the camp for him when I was in university, every summer in Boreal Forest. And before buying the camp, our summer vacations were getting in a Volkswagen van and going up and canoeing in the Boreal Forest. So I spent a lot of time there. I will tell you that it is the part of the world that I still feel the most comfortable in. I go back every summer. I take my daughters back since they were 3 years old to go canoeing in the wilderness, and I think it's an area where the ecosystems are still intact. It is still an area of great biodiversity and incredible magnificence, and that has stayed with me through the course of my life. The importance of actually protecting nature, and ensuring that we actually are creating space to have the ability to celebrate nature that we in Canada are very privileged to have relative to many other parts of the world.
We absolutely are. And thank you for that, because I know that nature's very near and dear to your heart, and it comes quite honestly. So I just want to thank you for that. We've seen Canada leading in the nature space, joining the High Ambition Coalition, our commitment to 25 by 25 and 30 by 30. Those are all clear signals by the Government of Canada that we're committed to addressing the global loss of rapid biodiversity loss. And yet Canada is also home to some of the world's largest carbon stores remaining on the planet. And I note that that includes the boreal forest and peatlands here in Ontario. Given our commitments to carbon neutrality, how does that frame our approach to these challenges?
Well, I mean, in terms of carbon neutrality, first and foremost, we should be focused on protecting areas of large intact carbon stores, because that doesn't help us reduce emissions, but it helps us from making the problem worse. And so areas like the Hudson Bay lowlands and other spaces that are really, really important to ensure that we actually are not making our climate problem or challenges more severe. I think those are protected spaces that we actually need to ensure we're moving on quickly. They are obviously also not just important from the perspective of carbon stores, but they're important from biodiversity's perspective as well. So those are really critical. And then, of course, we need to, from a climate perspective, work on reducing emissions from all of the sources that we know exist.
Yeah.
And certainly part of that is the nature-based solutions idea. But it's got to start with thinking about some of these intact ecosystems that exist, that actually can help us both with the carbon problem and the biodiversity challenge.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's a very good answer. Um, and then maybe I'll just conclude with one final question for you. Um, Minister, nature was a refuge for all of us during the pandemic. We know, like never before, that it is up to us to help protect nature and ensure people have access to more protected natural areas everywhere in Canada, and including the province of Ontario. It'll help us recharge our souls, rebuild our lives, and ensure a more resilient future. We're deeply honored that 14 First Nations are sharing their stories this week about protecting their irreplaceable lands and waters. And just to give you a sample of that, we have Grassy Narrows, Kitchename, Kuzubin, Moose Cree First Nation, Weenus First Nation, Attawapiskat First Nation, Kasheshewan First Nation, Mushkegowik Council, Shawanaga First Nation, Pick River First Nation, Chippewas of the Thames First Nation down near where my hometown is in London, Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, and many more. From Windsor, literally to the waters of Hudson Bay, we have 50 speakers that have gathered to showcase all these special places they wish to see protected. So what is it that you would like for us to take away from this conversation that we're having?
There's probably a few things. I mean, first and foremost, let me acknowledge the fact that Indigenous peoples have been an incredibly important part of working towards the protected spaces and the progress that's been made over the past few years. And that certainly includes many of the protected spaces that have been created with Inuit in the north, but also areas like Jumbo in British Columbia, the Peel watershed that we are in the process of protecting in the Yukon, the western James Bay area where we're in the process of negotiating what we hope will be a marine conservation area. Indigenous peoples have been leaders in terms of working collectively with the federal government in particular to identify and to create these very special places and to move forward with Indigenous Guardian Program to ensure that we are actually looking at conservation as an ongoing activity. So I think that's an important acknowledgement. In terms of the takeaways, I would say, often the challenges that we face, particularly with respect to climate and biodiversity, can seem pretty daunting when you look at what has been happening over the past number of decades. But I would just tell you, in the last 5 years, I think we've made a lot of progress. We have a long way to go. But if you look at the very specific things that have been accomplished, I think one of the things that it tells you is you can actually turn this around. You can make steps to stem the rapid loss of biodiversity, whether that's through the creation of protected spaces or through agreements like what we signed with the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations in British Columbia to protect southern mountain caribou. There are opportunities to really turn this around, and it's really about commitment. And I know Indigenous peoples are very committed to this. It's about their way of life. This government is very committed. I think we want the provinces to engage this conversation in a much more fulsome way. Ultimately, citizens want nature protected, whether that's in the south where they can actually have access to it, it's in the areas where we do have extractive industries and trying to protect species, or in the north where there are these huge wild spaces that need to be protected. But we need to work on this as Canadians. This is a Canadian issue. It's an international issue, but certainly for Canada, part of our identity is about nature and protecting nature. And my goodness, we should all be able to agree on that.
Certainly is our brand, is it not? Yes. Well, Minister, thank you very much for those words of wisdom today. I really appreciate hearing from you, and thank you for taking such a strong leadership position for Canada and the world. And there are at least 50 speakers here today fully behind you and wanting to see the 30% protected by 2030, hoping to stem the tide of biodiversity loss in our lifetimes. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Janet.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I got rid of having the double image there, knowing that I wore my best color shirt for the presentation. So thanks for your patience with that. But I want to take another opportunity just to thank the minister again. His time was deeply appreciated, and I'm sure you all enjoyed seeing him speak about nature and hearing his story of his own personal experience in the boreal forest. I'd like to turn now to let's see, I want to make sure I turn to, Elder Capreol, I'm going to go to you in just a second. I just want to finish a little summary of the day and draw sort of a bow around that. So we began the day by hearing from Dr. Harvey Locke about the urgency to protect enough land and water. And we heard that the world actually needs us to do half, 50%. So Canada has a commitment to get to 30% on the way to half, we hope. And then we heard Deputy Grand Chief Mandy Gull share her experience and the experience of the Quebec Cree in protecting 20% of their land and soon to be hopefully ocean, and how important that process was to doing this, that it was about integrating into Indigenous knowledge of the land, the wisdom of the elders, and a vision for the future. And she spoke quite eloquently about an interconnected network of protection. She spoke about the overlap between climate and biodiversity. And then we heard that similar message from Ed and Kasheshuan, and about how climate change is actually changing the way of life for Indigenous people in the North and the animals and in their community, how that is changing the way of life, the animals they hunt, what they can fish and eat. This was reinforced again by Chief Donnie Morris from Kitchener-Kuzabininawig. And we finished with some very compelling videos from Mushkegowuk Council on the peatlands and the ocean, and the songs and the images that were so haunting. And they too spoke very eloquently about the carbon that's at stake in the peatlands, and how how the world from their perspective is changing. And I could certainly attest to that. I took a trip with Sam Hunter once on the Weenus River, and we could see the sides of the river just collapsing on either side of us from the peat melting. And but we also heard today about a great deal of success, and that several Indigenous leaders spoke about success, and they deliberately said that a lot of that was due to funding that was coming, federal investments that were made in Indigenous Guardians and the Challenge Fund projects, and that this is in turn creating hope, not just for them, but and for Indigenous people, but for all of us, because after all, that is also too about reconciliation. And of course, that's great news, because the government of Canada has just recently announced that they are investing another $4.2 billion in nature protection, including funding to achieve the commitments on 25% of protection of Canada's lands and oceans by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And that is to protect biodiversity and the species at risk. That builds on the 2018 investments. And that funding for nature will support conservation of up to 1 million square kilometers more of land and inland waters and in the ocean. And this will support our goal to achieve that 25%. And as I mentioned, it's also important for reconciliation. And in light of this, I would also like to express my deep appreciation for the Indigenous people who participated today and throughout this next couple of days in light of last week's revelation of finding the 215 children. And of course, the impacts that many Indigenous nations are feeling right now from COVID-19, we know it's quite severe up on the coastline. And at this juncture, I would like to invite Elder Capreol to help close the day. Thank you.
For sure. The bish craters no cause of them, Shawanaga don't jabal. Yesterday, the earth prepared us for this sacred gathering. The thunders came acknowledging the fire bundles. The lightning came to connect the sky world to the earth woman, and the earth woman to the sky world. The feasting began as the water poured from the 7 grandfathers and grandmothers that sit in that Big Dipper. They first fed the babies. The transference of that feasting of water. The little ones that are here and the ones that are yet to come, they carry that small dipper. And it is a forever. The earth woman prepared us as Sky Man did too. On our journey yesterday, we were traveling the roads and we were in some high elevation and low elevation. But in each level, earth woman, grandmothers, were showing us something very, very beautiful. So just imagine the ground is hot. Earth woman receives the feasting of water to feed her babies. And it looks like in the trees and on the land, there's little fog patches. But what it is, in our teachings, that fog patches is grandmother's breath talking. And she wants us to speak together and to share good words, to remember to feast her and those babies, the little ones, even the ones that have left us. We do that as well, that we feast the ancestors, the ones that are here and the ones that are leaving. So Earth Woman and Mishomas and Shamado, the Creator, have given their blessings for this 4-day gathering. And it is 4 days because they started yesterday. And all the way, if we were gathering together, we would have probably left 2 days ago to sit with one another Why do we say P at the end of the day? Because we open thanking the spirits. We want to let them know that we are not finished yet, but we are going to go home, have some nourishment, sit outside, and you will hear the spirit songs and the little birds, because I know that they're there and your ears are going to hear them. For the ones that are way in the north, the loons will come and call you and give thanks because you have rose your voice today. They are the keepers of the sacred vows. But for today, we're going to end in a good way by just giving that beautiful thanks as it was given to us, the encouragement. So for that, my friends, have a good rest this evening. And tomorrow is another beautiful sacred day. Until that time.
Good, Marilyn. Thank you very, very much. Please join us tomorrow at 9 for another full day. We'll be going from Burling to the northern shores of Lake Superior, and we have 20 speakers tomorrow, another full roster of excellence, and my many thanks to all of the volunteers and people who helped put all of this together today. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Yeah.